Book 3, Chapter 73, continuing with verse 35. The individual soul of Suchi thought of entering into the heart of a young vulture flying in the air. Thus, by help of her vital breath, she soared to it and rested herself in the air like that bird. The vulture, filled with the malevolent spirit of the choleric Suchi itself, began to think of executing the purposes that Suchi had in her mind. Thus the vulture, bearing the unsatisfied Suchi within its body, flew to its intended spot on the mountain. It was driven there like a cloud by the wind, and it was in this place that Suchi was to be released from her needle shape. It sat there in its state of asceticism on a spot of the solitary forest, seeming to be freed from all desires of the world. It stood there on one of its legs, supported on the tip of its toe. It looked like the statue of some god that had been consecrated on the top of the mountain by someone in the form of Garuda. There, standing on one leg, supported on an atom of dust, she remained like the mountain peacock that stands with its head raised to the sky. The vulture, seeing the living Suchi coming out of his body and standing on the mountain like a statue, fled and disappeared from that place. Suchi came out from the body of the bird like a spirit coming out of it, and the intellect aspiring to higher regions. She came out like particles of fragrance, fly upon the wings of wind, to be born into a nose and meet the breath of the nostrils. The vulture fled to its own place after leaving Suchi at that place, like a porter unburdening himself of his load. And on return, he found himself relieved of his lecherous diseases. Now the iron Suchi, being seated in her tapas, in the form of the living Suchi, appeared as graceful as a good man, engaged in the performance of his proper duty. Because a formless spirit is unable to do anything without the support or instrument of form, so the living Suchi supported herself on the tip of her toe in order to perform her tapas. The living Suchi sheathed the iron needle like an evil female Yashka spirit, wraps itself around a sinsapa tree, and like the winds, unfold particles of odor, which they bear away in their bosom. From then, O Indra, she has undertaken her protracted tapas, and she has passed many years in the solitary wilderness in her steady position and the posture of body. It now behooves you, O Indra, who is skilled in stratagems, to devise some plan to delude her from her object, or else her tapas will destroy the people you have so long preserved. Now we have an interesting situation developing. This Rakshasi, is performing tapas for egoic purposes. Balancing karmic traces for egoic purposes. And potentially could achieve some higher state of consciousness so high that the Rakshasa could actually enter into the realm of the Manomaya kosha. But Indra is in charge of that realm, acts like a guardian, and stops unworthy beings from entering. So how could it even be possible that someone with the heavy burden of individual karma, like a Rakshasa, could even accomplish this of entering into the celestial realms? We hear about this from time to time in the Vedic literature, that the celestial realms are being challenged by the asuras. Asura means against sura. Sura means God. That means someone who is inclined to achieve higher states of consciousness for egoic purposes, not to unite with Krishna, but to become even more separate from Krishna. So we have someone here who is attempting this kind of feat. And it is possible because of the situation that allows one to achieve Moksha level 1 and Moksha level 2, God consciousness, entry into the celestial realm, the lower celestial realm, can be accomplished without balancing all of the karmic traces. And so what the Rakshasas do, the Asuras, is they meditate in such a way that they are balancing karma very pointedly and with precision to open up a channel or a tunnel in their mountain ranges of karma that allows them to experience Moksha level 1 and Moksha level 2. So this is apparently what Karakati is up to. So now it's up to Indra to stop her from proceeding. Because basically she's up to no good. She'll become a disruption in the lower celestial realm. So let's see what Indra does to stop this Rakshasi from balancing the final karmic traces that would allow her entry into Moksha level 2. Vasishta said, Indra, having heard these words of Narada, sent Maruta, the god of winds, to search for Suchi in all quarters of the globe. Then God Maruta, in his spiritual form of intelligence, proceeded in quest of her. Having traversed the ethereal regions, he alighted upon the nether world. The winds and all other elemental and physical powers are also believed to be endued with intelligence. They are not mere brute forces. They could never regularly discharge their proper function without intelligence. So this is an interesting statement, basically personifying or giving quality of intelligence to wind. He saw everything instantly at a glance of his intelligence, which perceived all things in one view. Just like the sight of the Supreme Spirit sees through all bodies without exception nor hindrance. His sight stretched to Loka mountain in the polar circle, far beyond the 7 seas of the earth, where there is a large tract of land abounding with gems. He viewed the circle of Pushkara continent, surrounded by a sea of sweet water and containing mountains with their dales and valleys. He next saw Gometa Islands, surrounded by the liquid sea of liquor with its marine animals and its land abounding with cities and towns. He saw also the fertile and peaceful continent of Kancha Dvipa, bounded by the sweet saccharine sea and beset by a range of mountains. Further on was the Sveta Dvipa, White Island, with its subsidiary isles surrounded by the Milky Ocean, and having the temple of Vishnu in the midst of it. After that appeared the Sea of Butter, surrounding Kushadvipa Island, and having chains of mountains and cities with buildings in them. Then came Sakadvipa in view amidst the ocean of curds, containing many countries and many large and populous cities in them. At last appeared Jambudvipa, Asia, girded by the Sea of Salt, having Meru and other boundary mountains and many countries in it. Thus, the intelligence of air, Marut, having alighted on earth upon the wings of winds, rapidly spread itself to its utmost ends. The god of air then directed his course to Jambudvipa, Asia. Arriving there, he made his way to the summit of the snowy mountain, the Himalaya, where Suchi was performing her tapas. On the highest top of the summit, he saw a great desert, as extensive as the expanse of the sky, and devoid both of living creatures and the vestiges of animal bodies. It was unproductive of greens or grass, owing to its nearness to the sun. And it was covered with dust, like that which makes this earth. There, like the lucid waters of a river, spread a wide ocean of mirage to excite the thirst and allure the longings of men by its various colors that resemble the variegated colors of a rainbow. Its wide expanse, reaching almost to infinity, was not measurable even by the regions of the quarters of heaven. And the gusts of wind blowing upon it served to cover it with a canopy of dust. It resembled a wanton woman, smeared with red powder, like sunbeams, and sandalwood paste, like the moonbeam, and attentive to the whistling of the breeze. The god of the winds, having traveled all over the 7 continents and their seas, and being tired with its long journey on the surface of the earth, rested his gigantic body, which fills the infinite space in all directions, on the top of that mountain, like a butterfly resting on the twig of a tree after its wearied flight in the air. Chapter 74, Consummation of Suchi's Tapas. Vishnu Vasishta speaking. The god of the winds saw Suchi standing erect, like a crest on the summit of the mountain. Amidst that vast tract of desert all around, she stood upon one leg, fixed in her meditation and roasted by the burning sun over her head. She was dried up to a skeleton by her continued fasting, and her belly was contracted to shrunken skin. Now and then, she inhaled the hot air with her open mouth, then breathed it out, as her heart could not contain the repeated influx of air. She was withered under the scorching sunbeams and battered in her frame by the hotter winds of the desert. Yet she moved not from her standpoint, as she was relieved every night by the cold bath of moonbeams. She was content covering her head with particles of dust, and did not like to change her state for a better fortune. She gave up the possession of her forest to other living beings, and lived apart, all in the form of a crest of hair. Her breathings, being withdrawn to the cranium, appeared out of it like a tuft of hairs or bushes clapped on her head. The god of air was astonished to see Suchi in this state. He bowed down to her and was struck with terror as he saw her more carefully. He was so overawed by the blaze of her body that he dared not ask her anything, such as, "O saintly Suchi, why do you undertake these austerities?" He only exclaimed, "O holy Suchi, how wonderful is the sight of your tapas." Impressed with veneration for her holiness, the god made his departure to heaven from where he had come. He passed the regions of clouds and reached the sphere of the still air, Sthiravayu. Then, leaving the realm of the spiritual masters behind him, he arrived at the ecliptic path of the sun. Then, rising higher in his airy car, he arrived at the city of Indra, where he was cordially embraced by the Lord of Gods for the merit of his sight of Suchi. Being asked what he saw, he related all that he had seen to the assembled gods in the court of Indra. Pavana, the wind god, said, "Here is a king of mountain in the high Himalayas, situated in the midst of Jambudvipa, Asia. It has Lord Shiva, who bears the crescent of the moon on his forehead, for his son-in-law. North of it is a great peak with a plain land above it. That is where the holy Suchi holds her hermitage and performs her rigorous time." What more shall I relate, other than that she has abstained even from air and has made a mess of her entrails coiled up together. She has contracted the opening of her mouth into a needle hole and stopped even that with a particle of dust in order to restrain it from receiving even a cold dewdrop for food. The fervor of her tapas has made the snowy mountain forsake its coldness and assume an igneous form, which is difficult to approach. Therefore, let all of us rise and go to the great Father of creatures for redress, or know that the result of her fervent tapas must prove to our disadvantage. Hearing Pavana's words, Lord Indra, in company with the other gods, proceeded to the abode of Brahma and prayed to him for their safety. Brahma answered, "I am going even now to the summit of the snowy Himalaya to give Suchi her desired boon." Upon this assurance of Brahma, the gods all returned to their celestial abode. During this time, Suchi became perfect in her holiness. She began to glow with the fervor of her tapas on the mountain of the immortal. Suchi very clearly perceived the passage of time by fixing her open eyes on the sun and by counting days by the rays of solar light penetrating the opening of her mouth, the needle hole. Suchi, though flexible as a bit of thread, has attained the firmness of Mount Meru by her erect posture. She saw by the ray of sunlight that penetrated the eye of the needle that her shadow was the only witness to her upright tapas. Suchi's shadow, the only attendant on her tapas, hid herself under her feet for fear of the midday heat. So do people find their best friends, forsake their company in times of adversity. The union of the three persons, of the iron, the ascetic, and the shadowy Suchi, like the meeting of the three rivers, Asi, Purana, and Ganga, described a triangle in the form of the sacred city of Benares. This union of the three, like the confluence of three rivers of Triveni, Ganga, Yamuna, and Saraswati, purifies the sins of men by the three different colors of their waters, namely the blue, black, and white. A person becomes acquainted with the unknown cause of all only by reasoning in his own mind and by means of his self-consciousness. Awareness of one's own mind is the best guide in all things, Rama, for there is no better teacher for men. Chapter 75. Suchi regains her former frame. Vashishta continued. After 1,000 years of long and painful tapas by Suchi, Brahma, the great father of creation, appeared to her under his pavilion of the sky and bade her accept the boon she preferred. Suchi was absorbed in her tapas, her vital principle of life remaining dormant in her, wanted the external organs of sense to give utterance to her prayer. She remained only to think upon the choice she should make. She thought to herself, I am now a perfect being, and I am delivered from my question. Therefore, what blessing do I need to ask beyond this state of beatitude, bliss of contentment, and self-resignation, which I already possess in my peace and tranquility? I have the knowledge of all that is to be known. I am free from the web of errors. My rationality is developed. What more is necessary for a perfect and rational being? Let me remain seated as I am in my present state. I am the light of truth and quite removed from the darkness of untruth. What else is there for me to ask or accept? I have passed a long period in my ignorance. I was carried away like a child by the demon of the evil genius of earthly desires. This desire is now brought under subjection by the power of my reasoning. So of what value are all the objects of my desire to my soul? The Lord of Creatures kept looking on Suchi, sitting with her mind fixed in her silent meditation and resigned to her destiny. She was quite withdrawn from all external sensations and from the use of her bodily organ. Brahma, with the kindness of his heart, again approached the indifferent woman and said, "Receive your desired blessing and live to enjoy for some time longer on earth. Then, having enjoyed the joys of life, you shall attain the blissful state from which you shall have no more to return here. This is a fixed decree destined for all living beings on earth. By merit of your tapas, O best of womankind, let your desire be crowned with success. Resume your former physical form and remain as a Rakshasi in this mountain forest. Regain your cloud-like shape, of which you are deprived at present, and revive like a sprout from your pin-like root to become like a big tree growing out of this small root and little seed. You shall get an inward supply of serum from your muscle tendon, like a plant gets its sap from the seeded grain. The circulation of that juice will cause growth, like that of a germ from an ingrained seed. Your knowledge of truth has no fear of falling into the difficulties of the world. On the contrary, the righteousness of your soul will lead you like a huge, heavy cloud with its pure water high in the heaven, in spite of the blasting gusts of the wind. By your constant practice of yoga meditation, you accustom yourself to a state of death-like samadhi. For your intellectual delight, you have thereby become assimilated into the trance of your meditation. But your meditation must be compatible with your worldly affairs. And the body, like the breeze, is nourished best by its constant agitation. Therefore, my daughter, you are acting contrary to nature by avoiding the action that your nature requires. There can be no objection to your slaughter of animal life under proper bounds. Therefore, act within the bounds of justice and refrain from all acts of injustice in the world. Stick steadfastly to reason if you should like to live liberated in this life. Saying so far, the god disappeared from below to his heavenly sphere. When Suchi said to him, "Be it so, I have no objection to this." Then she thought in her mind, she had no cause to be dissatisfied with the decree of the lotus-born Brahma. She found herself immediately in the possession of her former body. She came to be of the measure of a span at first, then of a cubit, and next a full fathom in length. She was quickly increased in height. She grew up like a tree until she was in the form of a cloud. She had all the members of her body added to her instantly, in the manner of the growth of tree of human desire. From the fibrous form of Suchi, the needle, which was without form or feature, body, blood, bones, flesh, or strength, there grew up all the parts and limbs at once. Just so the fancied garden of her desire suddenly springs up with all its green foliage and fruits and flowers from their hidden state. Well, this is quite an amazing story. What does this give us in terms of instruction? Here we have someone who has bored through the web of individual karma to arrive at a state of a perfect being, delivered from my questions, without any need to ask for any boon from the creator of the universe. Perfectly at peace. So what is Suchi's state of consciousness? What has she achieved here? Has she become established as the silent witness? Well, we might say she has perceived or approached the silent witness by balancing karmic traces with great intensity of effort. One can create a hole in the web of karmic traces. And from that portal can observe Param Jyoti. But notice, she is still thinking to herself. This is an important clue. When one is thinking, one has not achieved moksha. This is an important benchmark. No mind, I am the self. No thoughts of I am a perfect being. No thoughts of I have the knowledge of all to be known and I am free from the web of error. So we have this clue, and the clue is Arkati in the form of Suchi has not achieved liberation. She's achieved a egoic imitation of liberation. And from this egoic imitation of liberation, it is possible to return to completely being embedded in the samsara and to lose all contact with Paramajyoti. And that's exactly what she did. So we have to be careful in our practice of achieving higher states of consciousness. When we find ourselves in this blissful state of samadhi, if we realize that in that state we still are thinking, we still are comparing our state of samadhi with the state before. Now I'm in a state of bliss. Previously I was not. Those kinds of thoughts tell you that you have not arrived. But you are close. And this is the significance. The appearance of Brahma is symbolic of the ego having realized I have balanced significant karmic traces. Now I perceive the effulgence of Krishna. I perceive the divine karmic traces. But I am not the effulgence of Krishna. I am not the divine karmic traces even. I am still the seeker. And when that realization dawns, you must know that more progress is needed. And so do not give in to the temptation to rejoin and live in the quagmire of your remaining positive karmic traces. And this is what Suchi did. She balanced enough negative karmic traces to find herself at the borderland, at a place where she could make that conscious decision to become the silent witness instead of observing the silent witness. And she wouldn't do it because she was too attached to her karmic traces. The karmic traces still held her back. What remained was still there. So what she should have done is continued her meditation because she had not arrived. Only the ego was impressed with her progress. But we know the ego is just a collection of karmic traces, right? So now the ego became the collection of the positive remaining karmic traces and was tempted to dive back into those and spoil the whole achievement.